Hi, I'm Hendriks, head brewer at MiniBrew. In this video, I want to show you our Brewery Portal. This is a web-based portal which enables you to brew your own recipes on the MiniBrew. In this video, I want to show you how to make a recipe in this portal and to get the most out of your brew day.
This is the brewery overview page. Here you have control over all the brews that are active. Unfortunately, I do not have a brew going on at the moment, so let's change that. I'm going to create my own recipe under the beers tab. By clicking on new beer, I get a prompt to enter some basic information about the beer I want to brew. Today I want to brew a nice and simple IPA. I'm going to call it the Session Season. The closest available style is an American IPA. So I select that. Well, I press save. And now we are ready to create a recipe. On top you can see the beer profile. When entering your recipe, the portal automatically calculates the color, IBU, original gravity and the expected alcohol content. This helps you with playing with all the variables. The first item we need to fill in is the serving temperature. This is the temperature your beer will cool down to when ready to tap. If you don't know what to enter here, I suggest looking up the temperature that's the most appropriate for the style you are brewing. Because this is an IPA, I'm going to set the serving temperature to 7 degrees. Don't worry too much about this now, you can always change this temperature once your beer is ready for serving. Next up is the brew water. We don't actually have to do anything with these values. The kettle water and premixed water additions are automatically calculated based on malt quantities. On the brew day, these values will show in the user actions when it's time to add the water. These automatic calculations ensure that you end up with 5.5 liters of wort without any issues. Next up, the mash. Now we can really start to make the recipe. The first thing we will do is to find the malt bill and the mashing schedule. Well, for this recipe I'm going to add only oats, Vienna malt and pale ale malt. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, first you select, for instance, this one is the oats malt for the flaked oats. The oats I'm going to add 100 grams, Vienna 100 grams and the pale ale malt 1200 grams. It's also possible to add your own custom ingredients, but that's a little technical, so I'm going to save this for the next video. Well, the mashing schedule, we're going to do a single infusion mash at 68 degrees with a mash out at 78 degrees. And do this for 60 minutes and 1 minute. If you want to brew a really heavy beer, you can do multiple mashes by clicking on the plus mashing stage. But for this recipe, we will stick with a single mashing stage. After filling in the mashing scheme, the color and the original gravity for the beer are displayed. The other values like ABV and final gravity are not yet determined. Now the mashing is set, we're going to define a boil schedule. First, we set a time. This beer requires a boil time of 60 minutes, which is pretty standard. We want to add some hops. To do that, we need to define the duration for the ingredient addition. The max duration of an ingredient addition is a chosen boiling time. So, for a 60-minute boil like this one, an ingredient with a 60-minute duration will be dropped in the smart keg as soon as the wort reaches boiling temperature. You can compose a hop bill by selecting the hops from the list. The corresponding alpha acid value will show up for each selected hop and is used for calculating the bitterness of the final beer. More hop additions can be added with the button plus hops. Well, for this recipe we're going to add some Amarillo and we're going to add 5 grams at only 50 minutes. I don't want this beer to be too bitter. And again some Amarillo at flame out at 0 minutes, and I will add 8 grams. The same as for fermentables, it's also possible to add your own custom ingredients. You can add also some other ingredients like herbs or spices or water agents, etc. All of these ingredients can be selected from a list as added as a custom ingredient. This recipe doesn't require any, so I'm not going to add them here. Well, after filling in the boil scheme, the bitterness of the final beer is also displayed in IBUs on top. The other values like alcohol or final gravity are not yet determined, but we're getting there.
Fermentation is an enormously important part of brewing beer. Here we are going to define how the sugars will convert into CO2 and alcohol. There are 4 different types of fermentation stages on the MiniBrew, namely primary, secondary, conditioning and carbonation. In primary fermentation, there's always an airlock or, like in this case, a blow-off attached to release CO2. The airlock or blow-off will be removed after primary fermentation stage is ended, like I'm going to do right now. Secondary fermentation is closed fermentation with no pressure relief. The overpressure valve is present just in case though, as you can see here in the middle. Conditioning is a specific stage which will trigger truck removal at the end, like I'm going to do right now. Carbonation is a stage that CO2 is added to the beer with this CO2 regulator. This stage has a fixed duration of 2 days at the end of fermentation and cannot be adjusted in recipe creation. But there are some user actions for handling extending your carbonation if you need to.
So, let's set up a fermentation schedule for our recipe. Well, we start with primary fermentation. This is always the first mandatory step. Well, first you can choose between an airlock and a blow-off as a pressure relief. An airlock is a default option. A blow-off is really only necessary for heavy beers or really flocculent yeast. We'll talk about that more in a later video. So now I'm going to stay with the airlock. Well, first we select our yeast. For this beer I want to use a SO4 yeast from Safil. Like everywhere else, it's also possible to add your own custom yeast using the add ingredient feature of this drop-down. Be careful when entering your yeast info to make sure you look up the yeast manufacturer's estimated attenuation rate, or the portal will not be able to accurately estimate the ABV of your final beer. You need to enter the amount of yeast you're using. If you're using packets, this information is provided on the back. If you're measuring your own, then set this manually. I want to use a very small amount of yeast for this recipe and I'm measuring my own. So I'm going to set this to 3 grams. After you entered your yeast info, the alcohol content, energy content and the final gravity of the beer are also displayed. Now we're going to set the temperature. Well, I want to do my primary fermentation at 19 degrees. I want to do it for 5 days. And then I add a diacetyl rest at 21 degrees for 2 days. So in total the primary fermentation is 7 days. If you're unsure about this, I recommend doing some research on the ideal fermentation temperature ranges for your yeast. This information is provided on the manufacturer's website. After primary, I want to get the most dead yeast cells out of there. Therefore, we add a conditioning step. So I click here and add conditioning. You see this pops up. And I want to do this at 12 degrees. So I put a temperature of 12 degrees and I want to do it for 1 day. So after this day, the trop will be removed. In secondary, we can do a lot of different stuff. For this beer, I want to keep the lowered beer temperature of 12 degrees and do some dry hopping. Well, first we have to actually add the secondary step by clicking here, and you see that secondary is popping up right here. And we're going to set the temperature and duration. And I want to keep it at 12 degrees for 2 days. I also want to dry up this beer, so I go to the bottom of this sheet and here you see while fermenting. You can add hops and other ingredients like sugars or herbs, but I only want to add hops. And I want to add the Amarillo, 10 grams of the Amarillo, and I want to add this at the beginning of the third stage, which is the secondary step, and I want to do it for 2 days. Please note that this number is just for your own administration. It doesn't trigger any trop or hop removals. I want to add as well some Citra. I want the hops to be mostly removed after 2 days. To do this, we need a trop removal. And to trigger trop removal after 2 days in secondary, we need to add conditioning stages. Ingredients are only partially removed with a trop removal. When adding more than 10 grams of dry hop, which we do in this case, it does not fit in the trop container. So we suggest triggering at least 1 trop removal for every 10 grams of your hops used for dry hopping. Because of the amount of dry hopping we added, we are going to use 3 conditioning stages in this recipe. Well, there's already one below, so we only have to add 2 more. 1 and 2. And you see we have 3 conditioning stages here. Note that a conditioning stage can have multiple temperature steps, but a trip removal will only be triggered at the end of a stage. So here I fill in 12 degrees and the duration of 0 days, so this will happen directly after secondary. Then I will cool it down to 5 degrees and we'll leave it there for 1 day. And again a 5 degrees at 2 days. Well, these are just filled in and ta-da, we're done. Now the recipe is filled in. I only have to press save and the system automatically checks if it's brewable, as you can see here. And now we can start this brew from the portal.
Hopefully this video helps you with creating your own recipes for a MiniBrew. We are organizing an AMA session on the 6th of April, which is New Beer's Eve. In this AMA session you can ask me anything about creating a recipe on the MiniBrew and about creating recipes in general. Feel free to drop some comments below as well, and we'll try to circle back with you on those. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'm looking forward to chatting with you at the AMA session. Until then, keep mini brewing!